morning. I'm Emer Kerrigan, the Deputy Director at Irish Jesuits International. I'm here today as your MC. We will have 7 speakers today, and we'll finish up around 12:30, at which point we'll head out to the walled rose garden out that way for that barbecue. So now I introduce you to our Provincial, Shane Daly, of the Irish province, and Shane will open the event for us.
So thank you, Emer. So I would just like to welcome you all here today as we celebrate 80 years of Irish Jesuits International, formerly the Mission Office. And I'd also like to make a special word of thanks to our keynote speakers who are joining us, and they're really going to say an awful lot more about the mission of IJI than I will. But it is appropriate that we gather and celebrate here in Milltown Park, where the Mission Office was first established 80 years ago, to serve and support the work and needs of the Jesuits who were rebuilding the Hong Kong mission after the Second World War, and to prepare in many ways for the then burgeoning mission to Northern Rhodesia, as it then was, Zambia, Malawi, as we know it better ourselves today. So I would like to simply really say a word on the generosity, the commitment, the resilience and faith of our Jesuit missionaries and lay colleagues, and to publicly acknowledge that, because their work has borne much fruit in building up the kingdom. Long before showing the way to God, walking with the excluded, journeying with youth, and care for our common home had become our universal apostolic preferences, these were the things that guided the missionaries in their work. Our gratitude and appreciation goes to the men and women involved in these works of service, both in the past and today. In Fratelli Tutti, Pope Francis' encyclical on fraternity and social friendship, he notes that we are called to a love without borders, and for taking an active part in renewing and supporting our troubled societies. We're all very conscious that today is a time when dark clouds of conflict gather over the world, which seems more intent on dividing people and nations. The generosity of those missionaries and the men and women who have taken up their cause and continue their work is more needed than ever. What they do and their generosity is a sign to our troubled world that a very different world, built on fraternity and friendship, is possible. A special mention must also be made of those who stayed at home, who ran the raffles and the cake sales and the concerts organised in parishes and communities across the land to raise money for the work. It was less glamorous and adventurous, but it made so much possible. To that end, we remember particularly Father Tom Martin, the first mission procurator, as the director was then called, who served in that role from 1945 to 1972, and then did an additional 4 years as the assistant mission procurator, so committing 30 years of his Jesuit life to the works of the missionaries abroad. So as I hand over to Father John Guiney, the present director of IJI, I want to assure him and his team, Emer, Tim, Yanaria, Joe, Amanda, Jim, Ratsuko, and remembering also Rosaline, who I think is now in week 3 of her retirement, and our missionaries of the province's continued support and prayers for their work, building that just and livable and humane world that God desired at the outset for creation. So thank you very much, and John, over to you.
So introducing you to our director, John Guiney. John has been the director for 15 years, and prior to this, he spent 25 years in East Africa. His last role there was as the JRS, Jesuit Refugee Service, East Africa Regional Director. John wears many hats, as do most religions. He also works directly with the Father General for the Society of Jesus on promoting a consistent culture of protection across the society, a role he's been doing for the last 6 years. John was actually the very first Jesuit that I met. It was 22 years ago, when he and Brennan Mangan at the back there interviewed me for a placement with JRS in South Sudan. And what a wonderful introduction to the Jesuits that was. We chose exploring new pathways of solidarity with the global South and East as the theme for this conference, given today's geopolitical tensions. It also follows on well from last year's talk that we hosted with Father Robiter here in this very room as guest speaker. Robiter shared his reflections on building new models of solidarity and collaboration, inspired by the synodal process and the statute. Robiter aptly reminded us, if you want to go fast, walk alone. If you want to go far, walk with others. So John will share more on walking with others and how that model has evolved over the decades. John, welcome.
Emer and Shane, thank you for the introduction, and first of all, thank you for your presence with us this morning. I know some of you have travelled from afar. I know Mary has travelled from England this morning to be with us. I know Bernadette is here from across the shore as well, and your presence is really appreciated. As Shane said, it's a day of celebration and thanksgiving for the lives and work of hundreds of Irish Jesuit missionaries who have served in different continents and in diverse cultures around the world. I think we have noted that Jesuits have served in about 23 different countries around the world. Almost 300 Irish Jesuit missionaries left our shores to diverse places, Cambodia, Chile, Paraguay, well-known Hong Kong, of course, Zambia, so well-known, Kenya and Japan. And we must remember in the 1800s, I think it's 1865, the Australian mission was begun. I think dozens of Irish Jesuits went to Australia from 1867 onwards. In a very special way, I also want to remember our lay partners from Ireland, who were and are a key part of our mission in different corners of the world. And of course, with Sister Bernadette here, many sisters who have been our collaborators and in our work over the years. However, today is not only an occasion for giving thanks and looking back in gratitude and reflection, but it is a moment to ask, what does our future relationship look like with what we call the former mission territories? In the words of the theme of the conference, we are exploring new pathways in being in solidarity with the global South. How do we read the signs of the times and discern together what this partnership is about going into the future? I suggest, very briefly, 4 windows, as it were, 4 key points that should be part of this thinking and discernment. And the speakers who will follow me will be in touch, will touch on these works and actions that speak of and to these points. Point 1, we need to acknowledge that there has been an ecclesial demographic shift to a global South leadership in our church in the past years. The centre of Christianity has shifted significantly to the global South. Where? Africa, Asia, Latin America. We now recognize that mission is no longer from the West to the rest, but increasingly from everywhere to everywhere. It is very significant that international church leadership over the past years has indeed shifted. Even Jesuit leadership has, and all have come from the global South. Our general comes from Venezuela. The late John Paul, or the late Francis came from Argentina. Pope Leo pastorally formed in Peru. 1/4 of the approximate 15,000 Jesuits in our world today come from South Asia, India, and the surrounding countries. The dynamism and the youth and the spirit of the church comes from outside Europe. In the global South, the gospel is being interpreted within specific cultural, social, and political contexts. There is a focus on incarnating the gospel in ways that resonate with local contexts and cultures. Point 2, about holistic mission or integral mission. Paul VI in 1975 wrote a key encyclical, Evangelii Nuntiandi, which reflected and inspired the work of so many of our missionaries, and it continues to be key in understanding mission and partnership today, as our other speakers will indicate. Integrating evangelization with social justice, development and community transformation is key to this evolving partnership. This is rooted in a theology that sees God's mission as encompassing the whole of human life, not just spiritual salvation or about saving souls. Integrated human development refers to the comprehensive and holistic growth of a person, encompassing physical, mental, spiritual, emotional, social, cultural, and moral aspects. It aims not just at spiritual progress or economic progress, but at the full well-being of individuals and communities, ensuring that they live in their cultures with dignity, freedom, and justice. Key aspects of this development is access, physical well-being, access to healthcare, nutrition, clean water, education and knowledge, spiritual growth, supporting religious, spiritual, or moral development, social justice, ensuring fairness, equality, and respect of human rights, environmental sustainability, care for the environment for future generations. This concept underscores that true development must address all these areas simultaneously, respecting the dignity and inherent worth of every person. Point 3. Care of our common home calls us into a key and active partnership today. The phrase, our care of our common home, is a universal mission and call to action to protect our environment, and it captures indeed a powerful and timely message. It reflects the idea that protecting and nurturing the earth is not just a responsibility for a few, but a shared duty for all humanity, across cultures, across all religions and nations. The famous encyclical of the late Pope Francis describes the earth as our common home and urges everyone, individuals, communities and governments, to take action against environmental degradation and climate change. His message aligns with many global, ethical, spiritual and scientific perspectives that recognize the interconnectedness of all life and the urgent need for sustainable living. The cry of the earth is also the cry of the poor. And Martha's sharing with us today will indicate how people who hurt most are the people who are least responsible for the pollution of our planet. The cry of the earth is indeed the cry of the most vulnerable. Last point, point 4. Our partnership must be about building reconciliation and peace while being cognizant of the cruel history of many of our partners and the necessity today of us to be agents of reconciliation at the front line of ethnic and civil strife where our partners live and many die. It surely is it's a kind of having an attitude of, yes, dealing with the past with truth and a penitential attitude, but it's also about building bridges through dialogue and understanding. There's a need for dialogue and listening to understand different perspectives, even those of former enemies, to find common ground and work towards the common good. The mantra of the late Pope Francis was always, we should be about building bridges, not walls. It surely is about forgiveness and reconciliation, the power of forgiveness is not just a personal virtue, but it's a social, community and political necessity for healing past wounds and building a more just future. We believe in those amazing words of the Eucharistic prayer of reconciliation, that indeed the Spirit can move hearts, that enemies can speak to each other again, adversaries can join hands, and hatred indeed
can be overcome by love. As Shane mentioned, that wonderful encyclical of Fratelli Tutti of cultivating fraternity and social friendship, Francis urges the cultivation of a new dream of fraternity and social friendship, moving beyond mere words to create a more united and supportive society. In essence, the Church's vision for peace and reconciliation involves a multifaceted approach that emphasizes truth, forgiveness, dialogue, and a commitment to the common good, all inspired by the example of Jesus Christ and the teachings of the gospel. One enduring example remains with me and many of us when Pope Francis met with the warring parties of South Sudan in the Vatican 2 years ago, I think. Salva Kiir, the Dinka leader, and Riek Machar, the Nuer leader. And Francis, at the end of that dialogue, went on his knees to kiss the feet of Salva Kiir and Riek Machar and said, "Save your people, please, from war and destruction." All of us, north and south, east and west, are partners called to building this peace and this justice. So the 4 points are indeed a key in deepening our solidarity. But let us, in our own context and our own cultures, continue to imagine in these changing times new and other ways in building friendship, partnership, and solidarity with one another in our planet. Because indeed, we are one family, the family of God.
It's now my role to introduce Nicola Brennan. Nicola, are you there? Nicola speaks to us from the Irish Embassy in Dar es Salaam in Tanzania. Nicola Brennan is Ireland's ambassador to Tanzania, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Burundi, Seychelles, and the Comoros. She is also Ireland's representative to the East African community. And prior to this role, she was Ireland's ambassador to Ethiopia, South Sudan, and Djibouti, and Ireland's representative to the African Union and the UN Commission for Africa. Nicola has been many years with the Department of Foreign Affairs. What's up, Nicola? Can you hear me? Good to see you. I'm just introducing you, Nicola. We can hear you, Nicola. And I'm just introducing you, and I hope I'm introducing you properly. Nicola has been many years with the Department of Foreign Affairs. Prior to her ambassadorial work, she's been instrumental in the development of Ireland's international development policy, A Better World, for 5 years. She led a department response to the AIDS epidemic. On a personal level and a Jesuit level, Nicola has been a close friend and work colleague of Michael J. Kelly, whom she will mention in her sharing. And she has been, to me and to us in IGI, a colleague and a friend. And during the war in Tigray in Ethiopia, she was our interlocutor with Bishop Tesfaye Medin in the Diocese of Adigrat. We couldn't communicate with Tesfaye. We thought he was dead, but he was under house arrest during that time, and Nicola was always our contact. Nicola, it would be wonderful to have you in presence, but it's great to have you here speaking to us this morning. Welcome.
Thank you so much, John. Maybe just to confirm, everybody can see and hear me?
Yes. I can hear you. Yes.
Oh, great. Thank you. And thank you for the lovely introduction, John. And Really great to see everybody in the room and really delighted to join you today, albeit virtually. I was actually home in Ireland a few weeks ago, and I think to turn around and come back again from Tanzania was going to be quite a challenge. But look, I'm really, really pleased to join you. I'm joining you here from my office in Dar es Salaam in Tanzania. As John mentioned, I was previously Ireland's ambassador in Ethiopia, and I moved here to Tanzania last August to become our ambassador here. And yeah, really fantastic to join you today. I mean, John asked me to reflect a little bit on the history of Irish Aid and some of the missionary work that I've experienced over many years of my time with Irish Aid and with the Department of Foreign Affairs. I think most of you in the room will know Irish Aid is integral to the department. It's just a division in the department. Irish Aid is a brand name. And I've been working with Irish Aid now for nearly 30 years. I think, first of all, just to say big congratulations to you all on the 80th anniversary of the Irish Jesuits International. What a fantastic milestone to reach. What an incredible time to be reflecting on the past, on where you've come from and what you've learned, and looking to the future. So big congratulations there. I say that you're 80 years old. Not many of you in the room look 80, but maybe there are a few 80-year-olds in there. Irish Aid is 50 years old, and I say I'm 30 years old, or nearly 30 years old. And I say that because I'm almost reaching 30 years working in the Department of Foreign Affairs and as a member of the Irish Aid team and programme. And I'll talk a little bit about that later. But as I mentioned, I've just returned from Ireland, where we had our Global Ireland Summit. I'm not sure if any of you in the room were at it, but we had the Global Ireland Summit and our ambassador conference. It happens once every 18 months to 2 years, where the department brings all its ambassadors home, and we get to meet with our politicians, we get to meet with some of the private sector, some of civil society, and some of our religious orders as well. But I just wanted to mention that I was really proud to listen to both the Taoiseach and the Taoiseach. They both delivered speeches on the occasion of the Global Ireland Summit, and they were both incredibly strong on expressing Ireland's deep commitment to our values, and really values that I know you all know in the room. They've been born out of our own history, our history of struggle for our own independence as a nation, our history of poverty, our history of hunger, our history of emigration, and our history of resilience. And I say this because really that's what Irish Aid stands for. And over the past 50 years, our overseas development programme has grown, I think, not only in money terms, but also in impact and relevance. And it is now central to our foreign policy. And that was really, really clear from our Taoiseach and Taoiseach, where they really stressed the values-based foreign policy that we have. And I think at this time, in a changing geopolitical context, that is really critically important and something for us all to be incredibly proud of. Irish Aid started out in 1973, 1974, so 50 years, as I said, and it was a time when Ireland was beginning to look more to the outside world and to see our role much more in a global context. And at that time, we joined the then EEC, now the European Union, and the Irish Aid programme started at that time. It was very small, it was very focused on multilateral contributions, and there was a small amount of projects related to the provision of Irish technical assistance. And I would say that at that time, while Ireland was looking outwards and fulfilling its international obligations in putting in place an overseas development programme, it really was Irish missionaries who paved the way for the Irish Aid programme. And I don't know how many of you in the room know Ronan Murphy. He is now retired from the Department of Foreign Affairs, but he was twice Director General of Irish Aid in the department. And on his retirement, he wrote a book on the history of Irish Aid. And in it, he said that the overwhelming view of those he interviewed for his book was that it was above all Irish missionaries we have to thank for the interest in which Ireland takes in the developing world. And that is an incredible statement. And I know if you look at his book, he interviewed many, many people across the political and civil society divide, including presidents Mary McAleese, Mary Robinson, and others. And he said in his book that Ireland had a huge advantage when it started out, in that the missionary tradition had built up a real connection with Africa in particular, and which resonated with the Irish public. And I think, again, that is hugely, hugely important and continues to be so. And I would also say that Irish missionary presence was a key factor that influenced where Ireland established its aid programme at that time. And at that time, Tanzania and Zambia were chosen as two countries with long-standing Irish missionary presence. And we know also that a number of our best NGOs, including Troker and Concern, if they're there in the room, and others have their roots in the missionary movement also. So we have, as Ireland and as Irish missionaries, a huge amount to be proud of and grateful for. I said that part of the story of Irish Aid is one of growth. So when Irish Aid was established in 1973, we started with a very modest budget of £1.5 million at that time. And that budget began to grow significantly from about the 1990s. And today, Ireland's official development assistance is over €2 billion, which is an incredible amount for a small country such as Ireland. And of that amount, €810 million is allocated to the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade and is managed through the Irish Aid Division there and in our missions overseas. And it's the highest ever allocation since the establishment of the aid programme in 1974. And it's the 9th consecutive year in which the Government of Ireland has increased our overseas development assistance. So it really is quite incredible. And I think over that time, over that 50 years, we've also grown in quality and professionalism. And we are, as Ireland and as Irish Aid, we're considered a credible player internationally in development. And there may be a few critics in the room, and great if somebody throws out some challenges to me. Of course, I'm biased. I've worked for Irish Aid for 50 years, and I'm incredibly proud, for 30, not that old, 30 years, and I'm incredibly proud of what we've done. But we are very highly regarded by the OECD Development Assistance Committee, and the Development Assistance Committee of the OECD reviews our programme every 5 years. It's a peer review, so the review is done by other countries, other members of the OECD, and it is reviewed every 5 years. And we consistently rank among one of the best for our focus on poverty, on least developed countries, on effectiveness, on sustainability, and on consistency and flexibility. And we also have in the past been rated by the Brookings Institute and the Centre for Global Development as one of the best donors in the world. And we consistently provide grant aid rather than loans, and our aid is not tied to purchase of goods and services from Ireland. So again, we differ from other countries on many of those aspects, which is really, really great. And then just maybe coming back to this kind of political support, public support for our aid programme, we're really fortunate to have that, to have continued cross-party political support and broad public support for our Irish Aid programme, and not just the Irish Aid programme, for development more generally. And we stand out in the European Union as having a public and a political system that continues to support Ireland's aid programme. And at this time, with the changes geopolitically, that's incredibly important. And I'll come back to that as well in a minute. As I said, and as John mentioned in his introduction to me, I've been nearly 30 years in the embassy. I started out in South Africa, in our embassy there, managing our Irish Aid programme. I then went to Uganda. I spent 4 years in Uganda. And after that, I had about 9 years at home. I was our senior HIV advisor within the department. I then went to Zambia for about 14 months, spent 14 months there as our deputy head of mission and head of development cooperation. And then I returned to Ireland and I held a number of different portfolios. And as John mentioned, I was led the development of our first whole of government international development policy, A Better World. And after that, then I was appointed to be Ireland's ambassador to Ethiopia and now in Tanzania. So I suppose just to say that I've lived in Africa for quite some time. I've visited many, many countries. And in each country where I've worked and visited, I have been consistently inspired by the Irish missionaries I've met. And I would say that it was missionaries that initially inspired me to work in development and in developing world. When I was a young child, I can still remember in primary school in Newbridge, County Kildare, and missionaries would be home on sabbatical or visiting for the summer, and they often came to speak either to us at Mass on Sunday, or they came into school to speak to us. And it really was the stories that they brought from many, many far-flung places in the world, and that really inspired me and piqued my interest in working in development. And I think, as Mary McAleese said, that missionaries helped us to be citizens of the world. While at that time Ireland was quite insular, looking inward, not yet looking outward, and missionaries helped us to see what was going on in the world and helped us to relate to the outside world. And again, I've witnessed the incredible work of Irish missionaries. I think not just their work, but their vocation and their commitment, their passion for peace and justice, and the focus on those less fortunate. And I think just really, really excellent work. And often I've seen Irish missionaries as being pioneers, willing to go to the remotest of places where people, you know, external expatriates are not there. Other NGOs haven't been to those places. And many missionaries have endured significant hardships, and they also try out new things. And I think, you know, that enduring significant hardships, it's not just the survival in daily life, but it's also the survival in times of conflict, in times of crisis, and in times of, you know, real emergencies. And John mentioned Tibre there. You know, that was an incredible endurance test for everybody who lived in that region, which was literally locked down during the conflict with no humanitarian assistance, no communication with the outside world for a very long period of time. And the Catholic Church, the Catholic bishop, were under attack. You know, they woke up to their diocese being, or their, the church and their centre being bombed one evening by the Eritreans. And it was an incredibly difficult time. And, you know, there are missionaries who've been in those situations that are, incredibly trying, but they've stayed the course to be with people, to be with the people in communities, and to provide support as much as possible. And I checked to see, you know, the number of Irish missionaries working and living overseas, and I understand that at the height it was about 6,000 Irish missionaries overseas, which is an incredible number. And while those numbers are falling, and we all know they are falling, I think the influence of Irish missionaries in Africa and elsewhere is still very much felt. And I know for a fact, like anywhere I go in Africa, Irish missionaries are very well known. The leaders of many countries have been educated by the Irish, including the first president of Tanzania here, President Nyerere. And he undertook in 1979 a state visit back to Ireland. He said it was an excuse to go and visit the grave of the Irish priest who had taught him as a young boy. And that is incredible. He went to Tipperary to do so. And just an aside as well, in terms of, you know, I suppose the strength of Irish missionaries. In 2003, before I left Uganda, there was a visit actually from our Minister of Foreign Affairs at the time, David Andrews, and we had set up a meeting with President Museveni. I was a junior diplomat at the time, but we had prepared all the briefing for Minister Andrews. I was tasked to brief him, to get him ready for the meeting. We said it was going to be about X, Y, and Z. These are the type of issues that would come up. And President Museveni walked into the meeting, he thumped the table, and he said, "I have a problem with the Irish." And the ambassador looked at me and he said, "What is going on? What have we missed here?" And what it was about was, we had no idea what was coming next, but what it was about was a woman called Sister Cephas. She's an Irish nun who ran one of the best girls' schools in Namagongo in Uganda, and she was due to retire and return home to Ireland. President Museveni's children had gone through that school. Many others had gone through that school. He did not want her to return home. And his request wasn't really a request. It was a demand to David Andrews at that time to go back and intervene with her order back home so that she could stay in Uganda and stay as the principal of Namagungo Girls' School. Now, I don't know what happened actually, so that question I don't know because I left shortly after, but I think she stayed an extra few years before returning home. But others, she'd made a huge contribution there, was very, very visible, very significant contribution, as have others over the years that I've met. And a few I'll call out as kind of dear to me and people that I've met, but I know there are thousands out there. But, you know, Dr. Maura Lynch and Sister Ursula Sharp and Dr. Dinton Handley in Uganda, Father Michael J. Kelly, as you mentioned, John, in Zambia, Father Sean O'Leary, Sister Anya Hughes, and Father John Cleary in South Africa, many dear friends of mine, Father Owen Lambert and Father Paddy Moon in Ethiopia, and now here in Tanzania, over many, many years, Father Dan Naud, Sister Nora McCarthy, who's determined to reach her 100th birthday. She's at 99, she's determined to reach 100, so she gets her medal from Michael D, or whoever is our president after October, and many, many others in Tanzania. And as I said, there's so many to call out who've made so many contributions. But yeah, one in particular I must call into the room and remember with deep admiration and affection is Father Michael J. Kelly. And I'm sure you all knew Father Michael and who were also touched by the man he was. I first met Michael in 2003 when I was appointed as our HIV advisor in the department, and Michael was working with us, especially in advocating for education as a social vaccine against HIV, and particularly for young girls, as he saw the devastation that HIV was having in Zambia, his adopted country, and the impact it was having on education. And him as an academic and an educationalist, it was really struck him, and it was very close to the bone. And I would just call out the words of another dear friend, Kevin Carroll. I don't know if Kevin is in the room today, but I hope he is. And if not, maybe you can relate to him that I'm using his words because he wrote about Father Michael after Father Michael died. And he just said that Michael was the kindest and warmest of men, deeply spiritual and humble, and a great Irish missionary. He spent 67 years of his life in Zambia as an academic, an advocate for the poor, and in particular for those most excluded from society, including young women and girls. We all know that Michael played an incredible role in the global response to the AIDS pandemic. He published many books and articles. He advocated for those devastated by HIV, and he gave voice to the voiceless. And he used his voice, he used his intellectual power, and he used his voice to really, really strongly advocate and influence the global response. And he influenced the Irish government hugely during that time as well. For me, he became the dearest of friends, and I'm just incredibly inspired by him and continued to be inspired by his dedication, his compassion, and his goodness. And I'm so, so pleased to have him as part of my life and my life's journey. And there's many more like Michael as well, who have touched the lives of many people in Ireland, in Africa, and in Asia, and in Latin America. And I know everybody in the room will have their own experiences, their own friends, and their own stories of impact from Irish missionaries. So while the missionary movement influenced the work of Irish Aid, in turn, Irish Aid supported and continues to support the work of Irish missionaries, including funding for human rights and social justice, for education and health, and for youth and community-based initiatives. And I know that over the years, when I started in Irish Aid, it was quite an ad hoc approach to support to specific Irish missionaries, and it was almost like on a proposal-by-proposal basis. But that has been put on a more formal footing, I think initially with the Irish Missionary Resource Service and now with Mission Cara. And I see John there in the audience. And Mission Cara, I think, has been an incredible organisation. It's just brought a more structured approach to our engagement and particularly to our support with the members of Mission Cara. And it does mean that the members are working across 50 countries. There's no way the Irish government can have the reach that the Irish missionary movement have. So it's really, really an important part of our support to missionaries who are working to transform the lives of those most vulnerable, and really, really based on long-term and deep-rooted connections and commitments with communities. So just coming back to this being our 50th anniversary as Irish Aid, I think it's a really critical moment to look to the future. And I mentioned earlier the really changing geopolitical context. Our world is changing very fast in ways which we had never anticipated, I think. And those changes present huge challenges and perhaps opportunities, but maybe sometimes in the speed of change, the opportunities are sometimes hard to see. But we really are, I think, at a turning point in terms of international development assistance and international development cooperation. We're seeing many of the big countries, the US, as we know, have closed their USAID. The impact here is absolutely enormous. Tanzania here, was, I think, the single biggest recipient of USAID funding for health. So many, many thousands getting ARVs, many thousands getting malaria support. I think actually on the continent of Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, it's in the millions. And for many countries, at least I would say for Tanzania, it has some means to try and fill that gap with its own resources. But some other countries like the DRC, Eastern DRC, the conflict there, 77% of humanitarian emergency support, including food assistance, daily food assistance for the 7 million IDPs was provided by the US government, and that's been stopped overnight. So we're already seeing the impact here with reduction in the rations from WFP, the World Food Programme, to many of these people that are being reduced on the 1st of June to 50%. So that's the daily calorific intake has been reduced by 50%. So we're going to see huge rises in disease, huge rises in malnutrition, and huge rises in other, I'd say, social issues that we haven't really seen and really is impacting on individual lives. But we're also seeing, significant countries like the UK, the Netherlands, and others are reducing their ODA funding. And as they say, they're investing more in their own security and their own prosperity. So it feels like we're becoming increasingly insular rather than increasingly inclusive. And that is very, very worrying. But coming back to what I said earlier is that, from kind of my perch, I'm very proud of what I heard from our Taoiseach and Taoiseach. Their commitment to our values is strong. Our aid programme is strong. I think we're one of few countries in the European Union who increased its ODA this year. And we have in our programme for government a commitment to increase our ODA every year for the duration of this government, and something that I think, as Mission Cara and as individuals, members of the Irish citizens and community, it's something to really continue to push the government on to ensure that they meet that commitment. But given the current geopolitical context, it's clear that we will need to change to the rapidly changing situation. We can't just stay as we are because we're a small country. We're also dependent on a lot of the other countries for the impact that we make in countries like Tanzania and others where we are present. But I am confident that whatever the changes we decide to make, we will remain committed to reaching the furthest behind first. That is a very strong commitment of the Irish government, and that we will remain committed to playing a meaningful role in the resolution of conflict based on our own history of conflict in the island of Ireland, and knowing what peace and stability means to prosperity and development. And we will remain committed to responding to humanitarian need and to assisting those most affected by poverty. And these commitments, coming back to what I said earlier, are really based on and informed by our fundamental values, values inspired by our own history and values inspired by the work of Irish missionaries over many years. So that brings me to the end, just to say a really warm thank you for the opportunity to join you today. Thank you for listening to me, and congratulations on your remarkable work, and work that means so much to so many who don't often get support from their own governments. And I feel, through the Jesuit organisation and the Jesuit order, as well as the missionary movement through Mission Cara, you're all creating an incredible legacy throughout the world, and will continue to do that, and will continue to be remembered for what you've done for people, for communities, and indeed for countries. So, Gareth Mila Mahagar Galera.
We've been blessed at IJI with support from Irish Aid through Mission Cara from the onset. We have John Moffat here today, Orla and Claire, so thanks for joining us. Since our first Mission Cara grant back in 2002, some of you might remember the funding scheme, the Missionary Development Fund, the MDF Fund. We have distributed 11.8 million of Mission Cara funds to Jesuit projects in 20 countries in the global south and east. The reach of our work would not be possible without this support, both from Irish Aid and Mission Cara, and for that we are most grateful. Our next speaker is Leonard Chiti. He is the Provincial of the Southern Africa Province, which covers 9 countries. This follows his role as Provincial for the Zambia-Malawi Province. Prior to his 2 provincial roles, Leonard was a SCIAF, that's Caritas Scotland, committee member, a coordinator of GIAN, which is the Global Ignatian Advocacy Network, and also director of the Jesuit Centre for Theological Reflection, JCTR, in Zambia. In his latter role at JCTR, Leonard became quite adept with Irish Aid and Mission Cara, overseeing Mission Cara grants, which advocated for a bill on economic, social and cultural rights to be passed into law in Zambia. Leonard's no stranger to Ireland. He did his tertiarship at Manresa Retreat Centre in Clontarf. He also taught at Clongowes College in Clane. Leonard has tried to visit us twice since his tertiarship, but on both occasions had to return home as soon as he arrived. So we're delighted to finally welcome him back to Ireland again, and such lovely timing for him to be able to make it to our 80th celebration. We have asked Leonard to share his reflections on exploring new pathways of solidarity with the global South and East. So Leonard, I welcome you to share with us.
Thank you very much, Emma, for those kind words. Thank you to Shane for extending an invitation to me to come over here, and of course to John, who's been a good friend of mine for many years, and to you all for affording me this opportunity to share with you my experience with the Irish Jesuits International. Let me begin by apologizing. This is not my normal voice. Been nursing some sort of flu over the last couple of days. I arrived on Monday afternoon, and on Tuesday it rained the whole afternoon. And the following day it was warm and bright, and I couldn't resist getting out to the sea for lunch and just to relax. At the end of that excursion, I picked up this cold, and I've been nursing it ever since. It's probably stage fright, but anyway, we'll see. Second thing I wanted to say is that I was given a specific amount of time to speak, and I find whenever I have that kind of limitation, I prefer to use slides so that I don't go off the tangent and speak for longer than necessary. As a priest, when you're on the pulpit, sometimes you do get carried away and speak for longer than is necessary. And so I thought the slides will help me to stay within the time limit. Obviously, I'm very pleased to join you on this very momentous occasion when the Irish Jesuits International celebrates 80 years of its existence. From where I'm sitting, as I look back over the last 80 years, I recall with great gratitude the dedication, the selflessness, and the impactful work of the Irish Jesuits who came to my part of the world 80 years ago. I also bring a a message of deep gratitude from the province I represent, the province of Southern Africa, which began first as a mission in Chiti, became a vice province, and then province of Zambia, Malawi. And now today, after 4 years, we've become one province in the whole of Southern Africa. We're deeply grateful for the work of the Irish missionaries, especially in Zambia and in Malawi. I'd like to move on to a personal note, if you don't mind. Syndicated a number of names. There are people you might know who have, left a significant mark on my life as a Jesuit. Father Colum Oriodan was, in fact, one of the first missionaries, Irish missionaries, who came to Zambia in the late 1950s. Around the 1980s, he was living in a town called Chiti, which is my hometown. And I had been going to a Franciscan parish, and at the time, I was selected to go to Lusaka to begin my university studies. So I went to my parish priest, a Franciscan, and said, I'm going to Lusaka, the capital of Zambia. I'm not quite sure what awaits me in Lusaka, big city, new experience. So I'd like to do a retreat. So my Franciscan parish priest says, well, why don't you go to the Jesuits? They just live a few kilometers away from here, which is what I did. And I knocked at the door, and this old man, Father Oriodan, opened the door. I welcomed him and says, what can I do for you? So I said, my Franciscan parish priest has sent me to you and to ask if you would do a retreat for me. And then he says, well, why do you want to do a retreat? And I say, well, because I'm going to Lusaka and I'm going to start my studies there, and I'm a little bit apprehensive. And then he said, well, when you get to Lusaka, go and introduce yourself to our man, who's the chaplain at the university. The thing I find interesting is that the Jesuit residence wasn't very far from my home. At that point, I never met a Jesuit. I'd never heard about Jesuits, and that was my first contact with the Jesuits, a very significant one. Father Des O'Brien was one of the Jesuits I met at the University of Zambia, and I was involved in the youth ministry there, and I worked with him quite closely for a number of years. He literally became a father figure to me, and I think at that point I began to observe Jesuits at close quarters. There was no intentions on my part to become a Jesuit, so that was my second contact. Father John Dooley, time came when the chaplaincy organized a retreat, and they asked Father John Dooley to lead that retreat, and of course, happily, I signed up. So I consider him as the first person that introduced me to the spiritual exercises of the Society of Jesus, which, as you know, is a rich resource of spiritual material that Jesuits use on an annual basis to do their retreats. So that was my first contact with the spiritual exercises. Father Fred Moriarty, when I finished my studies at the University of Zambia, by then I had decided to join the Society of Jesus, but I had about half a year, which I didn't know what to do with. So I asked one of the Jesuits if he could find me something to do. So he contacted Father Fred Moriarty, who at the time was running an outfit called the Development Office, which was really development work in the villages around the Diocese of Monzem. And, I joined him for those 6 months, and I had an opportunity to be introduced to development work done by the Irish missionaries. Father Jerry O'Connor was the man who helped make up my mind to join the Society of Jesus. I was at dinner one evening in Chikuni Mission, and I sat next to him, and then I started talking about myself, and I said to him, when I was young, I wanted to be a priest. So he looked at me and says, when you were young, when you're still quite young, that is not too late. So after that conversation, I wrote to the Society of Jesus, and I was accepted. Father Michael J. Kelly, you just heard about him just now. I lived with him in community for 6 years. He was a very inspiring figure to me, and at that time, I had become executive director at the Jesuit Center for Theological Reflection, fairly young. And as you heard from Ima, part of the work was interfacing with all kinds of people, policymakers, politicians, development partners, etc. And quite often I was asked to speak at various forums. So whenever I had an invitation like that, I would go to Michael and I would say to Michael, what should I say? How can I say it? And Michael would give me advice, very valuable advice. And I valued, in the help that I received to him. But he was also a holy Jesuit. And I learned from him that you can be a Jesuit and be holy at the same time. The two don't always go together. So I found that very, very challenging. And then finally, Father Joe Dagan, he must say that I concluded my Jesuit training here in Dublin at Manresa House. And Father Joe Dagan was the teaching master. Again, he was very kind to me, very gentle. I was the only African in a group of 12 people. And the fact that I came from Zambia, I think he took special interest in me. So I can confidently say that if I'm a bad Jesuit today, badly formed, please blame it on the Irish Jesuits. But just okay. And so that brings me to speaking a little bit about my experience of, before I go to that, when I was leaving Dublin to go back to Zambia, and I knew I was going to the Jesuit Center for Theological Reflection, John Guiney was here and he came to speak to us as stations. And from then on, John has been a very special friend to me, and it's helped me to transition into leadership in the development sector. Another person, I was hoping to see him here, but he's not here, was Marty Curry. Marty Curry got me my first salary at the Jesuit Center for Theological Reflection and introduced me to Mission Curry. And we've had a very long beneficial relationship with Mission Curry over the years, not only in Zambia at the Jesuit Center for Theological Reflection, but also in Malawi, where we run a social center focusing on the environment and climate change, something that my colleague Martha will speak about in a moment. And then Father Leonard Maloney, who became provincial at the same time that I did, and has been a very close companion of the years. And that brings me really curious a little bit on the last 8 years of Jesuit missionary work in Zambia and Malawi. In 1945, we began to see many Jesuits from this part of the world arriving in Zambia to work in our school in Canisius, to open a teacher training college, to open parishes, retreat centers, development centers. I was hoping that Father Hector Mwale, who's studying here in Dublin, would be here with us this morning, because he's a product of one of those parishes that were opened by the Jesuits. As I indicated early on, these are men who were very dedicated to their mission, worked very hard, were very committed, and adapted to the local circumstances that they found themselves in, something that John referenced a little earlier. So as I look, and you can see pictures of some of those men, as I look backwards over these 8 years, it strikes me that I can characterize their missionary work by using 3 M's. 1, missions. They open missions. Essentially, the Irish Jesuits founded a diocese in Zambia called the Diocese of Monzen. And the first bishop of that diocese it was an Irishman called Bishop James Cowboy, whom some of you would know. I understand he was a rector right here, and he was appointed by Pope John the 23rd. And before he traveled to Zambia, he went to see the Pope to receive his commission, or whatever they call it. And while there, apparently he asked the Pope, where is Monze? Because he's never been to Monze, probably never been to Africa. And the Pope himself didn't know where Monze was. So they pulled out a map and they started looking for Northern Rhodesia and then found Monze and said, this is where you're going. So he was the first bishop of Monze Diocese. And as I indicated, Monze Diocese is in the southern part of Zambia, and all the parishes that were established in that diocese were first laid by Irish missionaries. So I as I said, it strikes me that one of the first thing or the important thing that they did was to establish missions, parishes, retreat centers, schools, etc. The second thing, which is obvious, is the fact that men came from this part of the world to do the mission, to do the work. And the third thing is to build buildings, schools, parishes, you needed men. So money came from Ireland into Zambia and other parts of Africa and the world, as we heard earlier. So I characterize that relationship at that time in those terms. There were needs that needed to be addressed. There were gaps that needed to be filled. And so men were moved from here to my part of the world. The landscape has changed. There are very few Irish Jesuits in Zambia and Malawi today. There are 4 of them, and one of them is right here with us, Father Clyde Dillon Malone. And the youngest of the 4 is 79 years old. And the last Irish Jesuits to come from Ireland to Zambia was Father Declan Maris, who since returned back to Ireland because they needed some younger Jesuits in Ireland, so they called him back. So since then, we haven't had new arrivals from Ireland, and I can confidently state that perhaps in the next 5 to 10 years, the trend will continue, fewer people coming from here, and maybe some Jesuits from my part of the world returning to Ireland. And therefore, there might come a time, God forbid, that we might not have a single Irish Jesuits in my part of the world. However, there's a lot of hope. I show you a picture of young Jesuits taking their first vows a couple of years ago. There are about 16 or 17 of them. So we're experiencing a lot of vocations in my part of the world. On an annual basis, we're getting something like a dozen young men taking their vows. This very year, in 2025, I have admitted 16 young men from across my part of the world who are beginning their Jesuit trainings. So the men that we will need for our missions are now coming from my part of the world. Of course, the missions are already established. We might open new missions, but at any rate, at the moment, we think that we will have enough men to take care of our missions. We hope and pray that we'll be able to find the resources that we need to finance for our missionary and pastoral activities. It also makes me think of the model of relationship or partnership that we have had experienced over those 8 years. It seems to me that it was a model that was asymmetrical. Men, money, ideas, and whatnot came from the north to the south. And there was very little going the opposite direction. Obviously, at the time, going back 8 years ago, we didn't have vocations. And even if we did, there were very few. We had many needs, and therefore we needed help. The model worked then. Will the model work now and moving forward? So I think that it's time, as we've heard since we began this conversation this morning, it's time to think about new models of relating to one another, new pathways of fostering fraternity and social friendship, as Pope Francis reminds us in Fratelli Tutti. And that brings me to suggesting some of those pathways. So I think that the best place to begin from is to speak about existing pathways or models of relationships. And I would like to say something about the JCED just very briefly because my colleague Martha will pick it up from me. One of the things that gives me a lot of encouragement and hope is to see the partnership that has evolved between the IJI and JCED. And in a very special way, I really admire the work of Ima and her team who have been journeying with my team at the Jesuit Center for Ecology and Development. They have not left their homes. Certainly, Ima hasn't. Jim and team perhaps best in Africa. But there's a good partnership that has evolved, that's taking place. And it's a partnership of give and take. We generate ideas, we communicate what our needs are, and they support us in any way that they can. Specifically, I've admired the assistance in form of mentorship that members of my team have received in the long way in a number of areas. I've also appreciated assistance in the form of technical backstopping. Today, as we speak, the JCTR in Malawi has become a very important voice for the policies with respect to the impacts of climate change, which, as we all know, affects the poorest the most, even though they contribute the least to climate change. The second thing I would suggest, again, something that has evolved over time. Many years ago, we had an Irish woman called Deidre Grant. I don't think she's here with us today. She came over and helped us establish our development office. So these development offices, at least within the Jesuit circles, offices that helps provinces to generate resources that they need to finance their ministries and apostolates. At the time, our development office was just beginning. And with the help of Deidre Grant, we were able to launch it, develop it, and today, over the years, our development office has been doing very great work to supplement the little that we get from other sources to meet our needs. I've already quickly referred to the climate justice work in Malawi as, a work that demonstrates that we can work together to address global challenges that we face today. I think we can move to the next slide. John did reference what's happening globally with respect to leadership in the Catholic Church. We just had the second non-European Pope elected. Our own Superior General is from Latin America. And a couple of weeks ago, I was in Rome visiting our young Jesuits who are studying in Rome. And I stayed in what we call a formation house. And it has Jesuit seminarians from around the world. And the first thing that struck me is that the head of that house is a man from India. And while I was there, I was invited to another important Jesuit seminary, which receives young priests from around the world who are doing graduate studies at universities in Rome. Again, it struck me that the head of that formation house is a man from Madagascar. I think this trend is common now within the church, where you're beginning to see people from the south and the east occupying important positions of leadership within the global church. Just wonder when we're going to see somebody from Africa, Zambia on phone, coming over to Ireland, perhaps to assume an important leadership positions. I hope that can happen. The next thing that I wanted to suggest as an existing pathway of solidarity is the potential for the IJI and SAP, my province, to engage in joint activities. And just want to quickly mention one of those. Ima mentioned the fact that I did some work with SCIAF in Scotland. In fact, I sat on their board. But on 3 occasions, they asked me to go to the climate change conference, the UN climate change conference, to represent SCIAF. And, on a couple of occasions, we had very good engagements with the Scottish government at the COP. And the last time I was at the COP, we also had a joint activity with the Vatican. We had some top Vatican officials and organized what they call a side event. And it was a very successful event. I just wonder whether the IJI and maybe the JCED could think of engaging into some joint activities on global challenges. For example, John did mention the commitment to work towards caring of our common home, something that I happily saw in the current strategic plan of the IGI. It is in our strategic plan as a province, but we also know it's one of the 4 universal apostolic preferences of the Global Society of Jesus, caring for our common home. Will that be an area where we can do something together? Sharing plans to find points of convergence. 15 years ago, when John organized a session to work on the strategic plan, I was one of the few people invited from the South. Myself, some of you have heard of Father Pete Henrio, but also there was a representative from East Africa. I thought that was a great thing to do, to kind of solicit input from partners from the South in terms of coming up with interventions that could address some of the problems that my people face in my part of the world. I've since learned that this opportunity has been repeated a number of times since then. I think that what we can bring to the table after all these 80 years is our own wisdom, is our own experience, our own expertise, and I think that we can help to generate effective responses to the challenges that we face. Global governance and international cooperation. Let's quickly say that I for a number of years, 6 years I think, was on the board of SCIAF, and I'm happy to learn that we do have a representative from East Africa on the board of IGI. I personally believe that without very strong institutions that generate ideas that respond to the local needs, contextual needs, that are effective and sustainable. Without those kind of institutions, I don't think we'll make much progress in addressing the challenges that we face. I think one way of strengthening such institution is to share leadership at the level of oversight and strategic levels. I think it relates to calls for stronger global institutions to address inequalities, pandemics, and climate change. In the current strategic plan of the IGI, I like the fact that goal number 1 is about international development. And it's about addressing the practical needs of people in the South. I think it will be great to generate some ways of working together to, again, advance the cause and the commitment of the IGI in this respect. Advocates for ethical leadership and economic justice at the level. The center I worked for, the JCED, has a long history of working for economic justice by providing ethical and moral leadership. Because as Ambassador Brennan mentioned, the ground has shifted so much with the emergence of people like Donald Trump, who don't care at all about the plight of people that live far away from their comfortable homes, comfortable offices. So what we need is a counterweight, people who can say to Donald Trump, "You are wrong." I hope that's what the South African president did a few nights ago when he met Trump at the White House. Comes across as a bully to me, but also being a wealthy man himself, he can never imagine what life is like in Malawi, southern Malawi, Zambia, Tanzania, in Kenya, in Uganda, and South Sudan. So I think we need to strengthen our role as voices of the voiceless and raise them to the level of the global community.
You stopped.
Maybe a sign that I should be concluding. And in fact, I'm coming to the end of my presentation.
Take it.
So, what would it mean for me moving forward to a future of deeper partnership? I want to reference again what Shane and John talked about when they talked about this encyclical by Pope Francis. The thing that struck me from that encyclical is the second chapter, where Pope Francis dedicates some time reflecting on the story of the Good Samaritan. And he makes the conclusion that to be a Good Samaritan does not necessarily mean relating and responding to the needs of those around you. It's crossing borders. I read a very powerful article by an American Jesuit who, again, reflecting on the Good Samaritan story of the Good Samaritan, said what the Good Samaritan did was he crossed over from his comfort zone and attended to the needs of the man who was left for dead. As I think about the life and work of the missionaries that first came to Zambia and Malawi, I can confidently say they crossed over. They didn't know where they were going. They didn't know what they were going to find when they arrived in northern Rhodesia at the time. But they did go anywhere. They crossed over to meet the needs of their brothers, their neighbors, their sisters, whom they did even know. I think we are all invited to cross over. In some ways, we're invited to leave our comfortable homes, comfortable offices, maybe not in a real way, but in some way, can we make the needs, the challenges of people we don't know, faces we don't see, or voices we don't hear, our own, just as the Good Samaritan did. IJI and the Global South and East are true neighbors. And as I've just indicated, we've seen incidences of men and women from this part of the world crossing over to meet their sisters and brothers and rendering some sort of assistance. So, 80 years to me of IJA work and ministries engenders hope in me, engenders hope in the community that I represent. And I thought it's proper and fitting that in this year of the Jubilee of Hope, we try and be people of hope, and people bring hope closer to where we are, but if necessary, far away from where we live. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Leonard, for your insights. Leonard will be returning to Zambia tomorrow. So it's just a short visit he's here on. So if you, when we're out at the barbecue, hopefully you'll get the chance to talk to him a bit more. Our next speaker is Mrs. Goodstadt. She's an old and good friend of the Jesuits in Hong Kong. Her family have supported missionaries in China and Hong Kong for over 100 years. Mrs. Goodstadt studied social science and public administration in New York and Oxford. She returned to Hong Kong in 1961 and has devoted her life to serving her community. She has a long career. She's had a long career in the civil service as Deputy Director of the Social Welfare Department and Head of the Hospital Services Department. She has been responsible for formulating social policies and welfare services. Because of her deep Catholic faith, she has been more of a social reformer than a civil servant. She has been heavily involved in NGOs, especially those serving people with disabilities, cancer survivors and AIDS patients. One example of her pioneer work was devising the local sign language for the deaf in 1972. In the medical field, she was a member of the Hospital Authority in Hong Kong, responsible for the city's 46 hospitals, as well as a member of the management committee of 2 major hospitals, one being a mental health hospital of 1,000 beds. In her various capacities, Mrs. Goodstadt became close to many of our Irish Jesuits in Hong Kong, and like our Jesuits in Hong Kong, she has worked passionately for the disadvantaged, for which we celebrate today. So Rose, you're welcome.
Thank you for a very generous introduction. I'm sure you all have heard of Hong Kong. It was a British colony for about 156 years, but the sovereignty was returned to China 27 years ago. This city has great natural charm. To the back of it. This city has great natural beauty with very high mountains and very, very deep harbor and over 200 islands. You have another speaker with a bad throat. After Father. Maybe you gave it to me. It is a tourist destination and trading center and the world's third largest financial hub after New York and London. But has Hong Kong always been like this in the last 80 years? Was this mission field always dotted with five-star hotels and luxury yachts?
No.
What were the conditions under which the Irish Jesuit lived and worked and died? And to what extent did Hong Kong benefited from the missionaries? In 1945, Hong Kong could not have been more different than what it is today. It was the end of 4 years of Japanese occupation. 1 million people had fled or been deported, and the remaining 600,000, traumatized and starving and injured, struggled to rebuild their city and their lives. And the 1 million people who had been in exile gradually came back. Their urgent task was to find food and lodging and to avoid epidemics like cholera. Even rudimentary medical service was lacking, and TB and polio was rampant. We worked with many TB patients and polio patients. So social and financial and judicial systems were completely lacking, and the former British officers who survived the 4 years prisoner of war camp under the Japanese struggled to restart building and ruling the city. Unfortunately, this rebuilding effort almost came to a complete stop barely 4 years later. In 1949, the Communist Party became the rightful ruler of China, and 2 million people flooded into Hong Kong. I have to mention 3 other major challenges for these Irish missionaries. The first was to master the local language. The Chinese language does not have an alphabet. Each word is a unique pictogram, and these missionaries have to master at least 4,000 to 6,000 of them. The spoken language was even worse. Each sound can mean 20 or 30 different things, and each sound has up to 9 tones. And again, each of these can refer to 20 different words. So briefly, if you are tone deaf, any one sound can be 200 things can refer to. So to master this language was real martyrdom, even for a highly intelligent Jesuit. The second challenge was the intense heat and the humidity and the teeming crowds. For most part of the year, the temperature is up in the 30s and the humidity can be 100. There were people everywhere, pushing through crowds, squeezing onto buses, and hundreds of children rushing out from a school gate, while another hundreds of children trying to push in, because at that time, the school operated on a 3-shift system. By 1961, the population had increased to 6 to 3 million, and more than half of them were refugees from China. They all struggled to survive in huts on the streets and in squatters. When the government finally decided to build resettlement housing, the standard space allocated to each adult was 24 square feet, the size of a double bed. And each child was counted as half. And these children can grow up very quickly. And so the million people living within 12 square feet. And that is government public housing. The third challenge they face, which sounded rather odd, but created equal difficulties. For many years, there was not enough water for the sudden influx of 2 million people. And in the worst years, water rationing was limited to 4 hours every 4 days. So my husband, who's a Welshman, often joked that the first survival skill was how to take a bath in a teacup. So these young Irish missionaries from beautiful Emerald Isle found themselves in brutal, hot, humid weather, squashed in on all sides by Russian crowds, and lacking basic facilities like water, and struggling to grasp one of the most difficult languages in the world. For a large part of this period, I was a civil servant in the medical and the social field, and had the privilege of meeting these Irish Jesuits very often. This morning, I only have time to introduce you to a handful, just to show you the wide range of services provided by these Irish missionaries. One of the very first Irish Jesuits I met was Father John Collins. As a child, I used to enjoy listening to him explaining the Catholic doctrine to my father in perfect classical Chinese. My father was only willing to listen to him because of his language skill. This attraction to Irishmen speaking Chinese was not unique in my father's situation. It's very common in many of the new converts. Their interest in Christianity, in this foreign God, often started with the admiration of the priest's linguistic skills. They were touched by these foreigners so warmly embracing Chinese culture. In the same spirit as Matthew Ricci in China in the 16th century and Castiglione in the 18th century. 10 years later, when I came back from my education in New York and England, this same Father Collins asked me to work in an organization he has just started, the Hong Kong Society for Rehabilitation. And this established the first modern residential center for victims of the severely injured industrial accidents. This was a very bold, ambitious project in 1961, but without this kind of intensive rehabilitation to help the severely injured, their families would have starved because the first Social Security scheme was not started till 10 years later. At this time, there was a serious lack of qualified manpower to build up the city and to establish governance. Only about 2% of the population had high post-secondary education. So these 50 or so young Irish priests, talented, well-educated, and totally committed, immediately filled the gap. They were eagerly sought after to serve on committees and boards set up to take care of children, families, fishermen, seamen, ex-prisoners, and even wholesale markets and agriculture. Never was a city where a priest was so widely involved in the city's work. Father Thomas Ryan was the first to become the director of wholesale markets and later the superintendent of agriculture and botany. During the Japanese occupation, many trees were cut down for firewood, and Bishop of Hong Kong demolished any wooden structure in the cathedral just to help the people to survive. So the post-war period, where the bare trees on the hills posed a severe landslide problem. Father Ryan imported thousands and thousands of trees from Australia to replant these trees on the Hong Kong. One of the first priorities for these Jesuits was the children without schooling. There are over 100,000 of them. So Father Joseph Howard founded the Boys and Girls Clubs, where the children were fed and learned the 3 R's. Even though many schools operated on a 3-shift basis, it was not until 30 years later was there an adequate facility for the children 9 years education. I was amazed at another facility founded by Father Howard. It was the Shoeshine Boys. It was modeled on the Newsboys of Dublin at that time. So this Shoeshine business brought in small income for the boys and also make them feel a little bit useful. I now tell you about Father Patrick McGovern, whose contribution was in an entirely different field. He helped Hong Kong to formulate policies and to enact laws. Father McGovern enjoyed extensive social contacts and had a great understanding of Hong Kong's situation. So in 1976, he was appointed by the governor to serve on the Legislative Council, which is our law-making body, and then later to serve in the Executive Council and the city's top policy-making body. So in these 2 very important areas, Father McGovern was able to guide Hong Kong to develop into a caring and enlightened city of today. 25 years after the missionaries returned to Hong Kong after the Japanese War, the church began to develop and mature. So in 1969, we had our first Chinese bishop. At this time, it was crucial to train informed and active laity. Father Brosnan was specially gifted as a spiritual director and retreat master. So he organized many prayer groups to help the new converts to cultivate a lively faith. In recent years, this city has about 2,000 to 3,000 baptisms every Easter. And now there are 400,000 Catholics in Hong Kong. The Jesuits are, of course, very famous for providing excellent education. So their first task after the war was to reopen their secondary school, the Huayan College, and to build another equally famous secondary school. Their education endeavors extended to the 2 universities, especially the Ritchie Hall in Hong Kong University. Over these 80 years, young refugees from China, as well as generations of Hong Kong-born children, were educated by these Jesuits in the best education possible. And they were guided and cherished throughout their formative years. So lifelong friendships developed. So these 2 Huayan colleges, as well as the Ritchie Hall, produced the first generation of qualified personnel for Hong Kong, including many of the barristers and judges and medical consultants and heads of government departments. 3 very well-known Huayan graduates One is the Archbishop Dominic Tang of Guangzhou in China. He was imprisoned by the communists for 25 years. 7 years of those were in isolation. Second one was Donald Yang, the first chief executive for Hong Kong after the British left. And the third one is Cardinal Chow, the current Bishop of Hong Kong. The wardens of Ritchie Hall in Hong Kong University included Father Alfred Dinan and Father John Russell. These two very well-loved priests, when they were in hospital for the last years, had a roster of daily visitors. They included always, every day, included 2 from Ritchie Hall and also from the St. Thomas More Society for Lawyers and the Guild of St. Luke for Catholic doctors, and also staff from the hospice, which was founded by Father Russell. As Hong Kong rapidly developed into a modern city, Father Dinan was deeply concerned about young people growing up in a progressively secular society where there was no ethical standards, no belief in objective truth, and where personal freedom was considered without any constraints. By 1997, just before Hong Kong was returned to China, Father Dinan started a very important organization, and that's the International Institute for Education for Leadership. So it offers a certificate course to train teachers on moral issues. For his contribution in the social and educational field, Father Dinan was awarded a badge of honor by the governor and also 2 doctorates, honorary doctor's degree by the Hong Kong University and the Chinese University. Father Russell was noted for his brilliant mind, logical and clear analysis, and great spirituality. So he helped to formulate the new approach in the church after Vatican II and helped the bishop to solve some of the controversies among religious groups. His 30 years as a spiritual director for the Catholic doctors and for the Catholic lawyers was to ensure that these 2 very important professionals always discharged their duties with justice and truth and Christian compassion. So every time he said goodbye to a friend in the legal field, even though they are in commercial law, he always said, "Be merciful, be merciful." His death 18 months ago, at the age of 97, deeply saddened me, for it marked the end of my 75 years association with these wonderful men. There is now only one Irish Jesuit left in Hong Kong. Most Jesuits in Hong Kong chose to end their lives in this mission field, to leave their bones there, as Father Russell said. A few came back to Dublin when independent living was no longer possible. Father Peter Brady returned to Ireland in 2002. He was living amongst his own people, but he was very homesick for Hong Kong. For 2 years, my husband spent every Wednesday morning with him. They must have presented a rather strange spectacle, an Irishman and a Welshman speaking Chinese all morning. Father Brady's book on moral theology, written in Chinese, is still widely used in Hong Kong and China. Let me tell you an interesting tale on another connection between Ireland and Hong Kong. In your 1916 uprising, the commander of the volunteer forces in St. Stephen's Green was Commandant Michael Marland. The night before he was executed, his pregnant wife, visited him in Kilmaine jail with his 2-year-old son, John. This Irish hero said to his son, "John, my little man, be a priest if you can." He became Father Marland and a teacher in Hong Kong and a supervisor in the school where my son studied for 8 years. Father Marland also taught my son, how to play the flute. And 30 years later, when Father Marland came back here for the 100th anniversary of the uprising, one of the first things he asked me was, "Does Leo John still play the flute?" Father Marland lived till 104, and just 1 year before he died, he always down at the school gate, making sure that every boy brought to the school bus safely. Through him, generations of students in YN and the parents and the friends learned the gentle love of Jesus. Throughout the last 80 years, Hong Kong never ceased to struggle, to build and build. A new school up every week, and some 30 hospitals were built, and public housing for 2.5 million people. The people continuously aspire for stability, prosperity, and better opportunities. At the same time, they were keenly aware of the political situation in Communist China just across the border. They knew the transfer of sovereignty was inevitable, and they were very concerned about their future. In the journey of uncertainty and changes, they were accompanied by the unwavering love and support of the Irish Jesuits, who shared their hopes and fears and showed that what was possible in the human spirit. The Jesuits supplied trained the first group of talents at the beginning of Hong Kong's successful story and continue to the present. Their work helped Hong Kong, with a refugee population in 1950, to grow into the thriving financial hub of today. This city is now the 8th wealthiest city in the world, with 156,000 millionaires. St. Ignatius' salutation to his sons was never so well fulfilled. Go forth and set the world on fire. But we have to remember that these missionaries were not politicians or educationalists or social workers. They were first and foremost priests of God. Like St. Francis Xavier, they traveled 6,000 miles to the Orient in response to Christ's call, "Teach ye all nations, baptizing them." Their work was the means to bring the good news to the city. They were the conduit of divine grace to a changing and complex city in ways appropriate to the time and unique situation of Hong Kong. In these 80 years, many YN graduates, Ritchie Hall students, and Jesuit friends were baptized. Their faith often extended to their families and friends. These souls were not won by Irish skills or talents, but by the priest's heroic virtues and personal sanctity. Witnessing their total dedication to the well-being of the people and experiencing their compassion and spirituality, the Chinese came to believe that Christ is the Son of God and receive salvation through them. But conversion was not just a baptism. They had to include the continued growth in Christian principles and moral virtues. The Jesuits' presence in Hong Kong has made positive impacts on the individual's life and also provided a moral fabric for the city to develop. I like to think that a city, rich or poor, must have a moral framework to develop. I believe that the Irish Jesuits, 80 years of Catholic education, spiritual guidance, promotion of human values, personal example, and long years of warm friendship gave the city its true value, its soul. Thank you very much.
Our next speaker is a Jesuit from the Irish province. He has returned recently from serving over 7 years in South Sudan and Syria. He has worked as project director in Maban in South Sudan, one of the world's most remote refugee camps in the world. He has worked as country director in Syria, being there at a critical time of the devastating earthquakes. Both roles were with one of our main partner organisations, JRS. He continues his work with migrants, being now based in Portadown in Northern Ireland. I invite Father Tony O'Riordan to address us.
Thank you all for coming today, and thank you to IJI for inviting me. Recently I discovered that another great institution is celebrating 80 years this year. You know what it is? Thomas the Tank Engine. Yes, Thomas the Tank turns 80 in 2025. From his humble beginnings as a railway-themed children's book, becoming a global sensation on TV, a beloved figure, teaching generations of children, lessons about friendship, responsibility, morality, and perseverance and resilience. It's quite a sensation and continues to be today, and has evolved in animation and in all sorts of social media ways to continue to engage children in the adventures of Thomas the Tank. What I really like, though, about the story of Thomas the Tank is not its corporate success or its global dominance in the child toy, lunchbox, clothing, and whatever markets. It's the fact of where it began. It began in the imaginings of a father who was nursing his sick son, who was, I think, enduring measles and was very sick in bed. And to encourage the child, to be with the child, the father engaged in this kind of silly imaginings of an animated railway engine. And together they created this wonderful story. Long before it became marketable or monetized, it was this beautiful moment of a father caring for a son and a son engaging with a loving parent. How we tell stories matter. If I started presenting spreadsheets of the sales of toys and merchandise, it's going to bring your imagination and your emotion to a particular level. When I tell a story of a father caring for a sick child, it brings us in other directions. And I think the point I want to make, as I see I'm down as the missionary, I want to share with you, I guess, or to continue to remind us of the missionary's imagination. Currently, I'm part of a team of 12 of JRS Ireland, the Jesuit Refugee Service, still only in its 40s. We have the junior child, junior sibling of the mission movement. And JRS on Ireland seeks to accompany and serve and advocate for over 33,000 plus children, women and men who have come to Ireland to seek international protection and who are living in over 330 centres where they are allocated accommodation across the country. Now, if those figures kind of trigger the mathematic part of your brain that wants to turn off as you approach lunch, I'd understand it. And strangely, this work of missionary and humanitarian work and asylum work quickly shifts to kind of figures and logic frameworks and targets, and sort of a model where humanity can be crushed out of it. Even in the stories we tell of our success, we can tell of numbers and figures and huge achievement. One of the people I accompany in the work with JRS here in Ireland is one of the young, he came as an unaccompanied minor, and we have a bond because he came from Syria, and he's now over 18, so he's living in adult accommodation. He's still in secondary school, and he's working really hard. His English is not so good. He uses Google Translate a lot in his classes and has to work really hard. One of the things he struggles with as a now 18-year-old is his teeth. Probably as a child needed braces, and he's very conscious that his teeth are not straight, and he'd love someone to give him 4,000 euros to fix it. I was trying to tell him, be realistic. Another concern of his is he, like other adult asylum seekers, live on 38 euros 50 a week for personal. They have their accommodation is paid and food is paid, but for other things, 33 or 38 euros is what they get, which is not a lot for an 18-year-old. And he's kind of conscious that the clothing he has kind of puts him outside his social group. So I said, okay, this is something I can't support you on the teeth, but I can support you on the clothing. So we got a voucher for, it was 120 euros, which for those of you who have teenagers, that doesn't buy a lot of teenage clothing. But we went to the shopping centre to get the voucher. We got it out of the machine, and I gave him the voucher, and I said, now off you go, and I'll meet you here in an hour or 2 hours. He said, no, do I have to spend it all on clothing? I said, no, it's your voucher, you can spend it on what you want. He said, okay, so I want to take you now for food. And I thought, wow. In a debate where we talk about Ireland is full, and we talk about the numbers, we'll miss out on the goodness, the moral character, the generosity, the creativity of that young man, how it changes the narrative. I, of course, told him, no, go spend it on the clothing. He also went off, and he didn't buy branded clothing. He went off to Pennies and Duns. And I thought, again, just amazing, amazing character. For me, it's something I tell people when I talk about my work with asylum seekers, that we tend to think in terms of numbers and problems rather than, actually, we have a resource here. It's very creative. It adds to who we are rather than something that burdens us. I would tell the same in my work in Syria and in South Sudan. I could tell you wonderful things of the number of schools we built, the number of teachers we trained, the number of targets we achieved. But what stands out for me in my time is Miriam, our neighbour, in the compound in Maban. We were separated from Miriam by a chicken wire fence. So what happened in Miriam's house and what happened in our compound, we didn't need CCTV. We could just hear everything. And Miriam had many children and many pigs and many chickens. And we knew how crowded Miriam's place was. Miriam lived on a very meagre amount of income from JRS and tried to raise 8 children. When Miriam's female relative died, her cousin died with leaving 6 children, Miriam didn't think twice about what would happen to those other children. They were coming to live with her. That was her generosity, her sense of responsibility. In Syria, after one of the most deadly earthquakes in 2003, in February 2003, which hit southern Turkey, killed over 60,000 people, about 5,000 of those killed in Syria, affected Aleppo quite badly. The JRS team, made up of about 140 people who were all themselves affected by the earthquake. The day after the earthquake, I met them and they were shattered. People in Aleppo are like people from Cork. They have a natural superiority complex, and they can carry this. They can carry this quite well, even after a defeat by Limerick. We can still keep our head high. But these people in Aleppo can be like that, but after the earthquake, they were shattered. And part of it was the earthquake was quite a frightening experience in the middle of the night, in darkness, most of the houses without electricity and facing this. I mean, everyone thought it was their final moments. You know, they all thought they were going to die. And then surviving and going out into the dark and the rain, and then having all the aftershocks, which continued for weeks. Everyone really wanted to leave Aleppo and leave Syria. One of our key members in the response, a man called Shafi, actually had a Canadian passport and could easily leave. All he needed to do was get to Beirut and get a plane. He wanted to stay, to be with his people. Miriam and Shafi are key memories of what I remember when I tell my story of my time in South Sudan or in Syria. And I think it touches on so many of the other speakers. I noticed other speakers, you keep mentioning the names of missionaries that touched you. I guess what I'm putting to it is the people whom we go to serve or to accompany in what we call the mission sites. There we encounter people of extraordinary capacity who become part of the story of the missionary and who change our lives for good. So in terms of pathway and continuing forward, I think it's really important to reinforce that the IJI and other missionary movements, we don't go as givers to passive recipients. We go to share with people who are already resources. And in that, something changes in our mentality. We are not givers. We go as people who are open to encounter and to be changed. And I think as individuals we're changed, we bring that back, and hopefully our organizations and institutions change. One of the things I'm struck by when I read the final document on synodality at the end of the Synod and synodality was the reminder that the Holy Spirit is the protagonist. And that to me is how I make that concrete, is then that our missionary work, those whom we go out to serve, are also missionaries to us. Because the Spirit never takes away the dignity. Even though human structures might take away people's dignity, the Holy Spirit never removes people of their capacity for service to those who go to give and to serve. I think this is really important, because if we can keep this dynamic in how we engage our supporters in IJI, it gives perhaps the freedom to unlock us more and more of our addiction to the consumption, to the lifestyle, to the perspectives that maintain global injustice. We can try to do it by guilt, and we do it fairly well with guilt, with our posters and our stories, but we won't go very far with guilt. I think by going with encounter and helping people understand the resource and the dignity of the people who are living from day to day, wondering where the next meal will come from, wondering where their medical care will come from, wondering where their education for their children will come from, understanding and building up relationships begins to free something in our hearts that I think nothing else can do. So let us be an IJI which fosters and encourages encounter. Thank you.
Our next speaker has travelled from Lilongwe, Malawi. She is the Deputy Director of JCED, and the work of JCED embodies the Laudato Si, calling on all of us to hear the cry of the earth. JCED's work focuses on restoring ecosystems, reforestation, training smallholders, farmers in climate-smart agriculture, green business, and producing eco-stoves. So like this eco-stove that we have here, it's much heavier than it looks. It's really heavy. And responding to natural disasters as well, like flash floods and cyclones, which have become much more prominent in Malawi than previously. Martha plays a key role in advocacy at district and national level, and she also represents Malawi at COP events, providing a frontline experience for the effects of climate chaos on smallholder farmers. Martha is currently pursuing her Masters of Science in Climate Change and Sustainable Development. So we thank her for having the time to join us for our 80th celebration. So Martha, I invite you to quote.
Thank you so much, Emma, and good afternoon, everyone. It is actually an immense honor and privilege to stand before you today as we celebrate this remarkable milestone of the 80th anniversary of Irish Jesuits International. This occasion marks not only a celebration of IGI's longevity, but again an opportunity for us here to reflect on the profound impact their work has had across the globe, and particularly in this case, Malawi. So today, I'm here representing the Jesuit Center for Ecology and Development in Malawi, an organization that has had the privilege of working closely with IGI for over a decade. Being invited to speak at this prestigious event is a testimony to the strong partnership between IGI and JCED, as well as the incredible work that we have accomplished together. It is also a recognition of the shared vision and values that unite us in our mission, which is to serve the most vulnerable and marginalized communities. So this invitation is very deeply meaningful, not just for me personally as Martha, but for the communities in Malawi whose voices I bring with me today. It demonstrates IGI's commitment to amplifying the perspectives and experiences of those on the ground, the farmers, the families, and the individuals whose lives have been transformed through our collaboration. This commitment also aligns profoundly with the Jesuit ethos of being men and women for others, which is a call to serve and uplift those in need, inspired by the teachings of St. Ignatius of Loyola. It is also a living embodiment of our late Pope Francis' powerful message in Laudato Si, where he reminded us of interconnectedness of all humanity and calls for a preferential option for the poor. Our late Pope Francis urges us to really listen to the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor, emphasizing that true development must really prioritize the dignity, the stories, and the struggles of the marginalized. And this invitation reflects that very same principle. It is a reminder that our work as JCED is not just about projects or other programs, but it is about the people, their stories, and their resilience in the face of adversity. So as I stand here today, I'm really filled with immense gratitude and humility. This platform allows me really to share not only the successes, we have accomplished together, but also the hopes and the aspirations of the communities that we serve. It is an opportunity to celebrate the incredible work of Jesuits International, while also looking ahead to the future, where our continued partnership can bring even greater impact and transformation. So in my short presentation, I will briefly touch on a few areas of our collaboration. Ladies and gentlemen, Irish Jesuit International has been a beacon of hope and a pillar of strength to us as JCED for over a decade. The commitment itself to supporting the most marginalized communities in Malawi has been both inspiring and transformative. Through our partnership, we have been able to address some of the most pressing challenges faced by the vulnerable communities, particularly in the areas of food security, environmental sustainability, as well as climate resilience in general. And one of the most visible impacts of IGI's support is in food security. In Kasungu district of Malawi, where many families really struggle just to produce enough food to sustain themselves, IGI's programs or other interventions have brought a very tangible change. The successful fundraising campaigns which has enabled us to provide critical resources and trainings to our farmers, helping them really to adopt sustainable agricultural practices that improve crop yields and build resilience to the impacts of climate change. Through IGI's support, JCED has been able to establish what we call ecological villages, which serves as models of sustainability and resilience. These villages are not just about survival, but they are about thriving in harmony with nature. So by promoting practices such as agroforest, organic farming, and water conservation in those ecological model villages, our communities are now better equipped to adapt to the impacts of climate change. Another area where IGI has made a significant difference is in the promoting sustainable cooking practices. In rural Malawi, where I come from, 90% of the population coming from the rural communities rely on fuel wood when it comes to cooking. And the environmental and social costs are just immense. You talk of issues of deforestation, soil degradation, and health issues caused by the indoor air pollution are just some of the challenges associated with the traditional cooking methods. But now we should say all thanks to IGI, because we've been able to introduce the energy-efficient cook stoves to the communities across Malawi. These stoves use less fuel wood, and this is the stove that Emma just talked about, and significantly reducing the pressure on our forests while again improving the healthy and quality life of our rural communities. This initiative is a perfect example on how small but practical solutions can really have a ripple effect, creating benefits that extend far beyond their immediate context. Ladies and gentlemen, IGI's support has empowered our farmers to adopt innovative practice and that harmonize with nature. Our partnership has strengthened the local economy and inspired neighboring communities again to adopt similar sustainable practices. In Kasungu, our farmers, with again the support from IGI, are embracing what we call ecological friendly businesses, also known as green businesses. These initiatives include apiculture, banana farming, the eco-stove production, and the fish farming, just to mention a few. And such initiatives are not only transforming the lives of our farmers, but are also making a significant contribution to environmental sustainability. So the green businesses that we have, which are being championed by IGI, are actually providing our farmers with sustainable livelihood. These initiatives exemplify IGI's commitment to creating a greener, more sustainable future for our community. Ladies and gentlemen, let me also mention that the partnership between IGI and JCED has also empowered our local farmers to become agents of change within their communities. Through the provision of the bicycles, champion lead farmers are now able to travel more easily to provide extension services to their fellow farmers. This has again improved knowledge sharing and collaboration among farmers, fostering a sense of community and collective responsibility for sustainable development. And just to add, IGI has also opened doors for us as JCED to connect with new partners and expand our reach. So, for instance, through IGI's network, we have been able to collaborate with Dublin City University, and I'm seeing Professor Phiri somewhere. Thank you so much for joining us. So through that collaboration, we are able now to implement a livelihood project in Malawi that is making a meaningful difference in the lives of the most marginalized communities. These partnerships are a testament to IGI's ability to bring people and organizations together to achieve common goals. We have also successfully advanced some key initiatives, including the establishment and promotion of village savings and loans associations. Communities now are empowered with the business management skills and are provided with farm inputs. And these initiatives have been instrumental in equipping and empowering communities affected by climate change to build their resilience, expand their economic opportunities, and secure a more sustainable future. IGI's commitment has really played a transformative role in improving their lives and fostering financial independence and ensuring long-term sustainability of the communities that we serve. Now, looking at the future, as we reflect today on the 80 years of IGI's mission, it is again important to look to the future. The continued challenges we face today, issues of climate change, poverty, and inequalities, will require even greater collaboration and innovation. IGI has already laid a strong foundation, and I'm very confident that their work will continue to inspire and empower generations to come. And in this spirit, I would like to propose a few areas for our future collaboration and expansion. The first area being scaling up climate resilience projects. Given the growing climate change, there is need to scale up projects that enhance community resilience. This includes the need to expand our ecological village initiatives to other districts and incorporate renewable energy solutions such as solar power. The other area is on youth empowerment programs. Investing in the next generation is very, very critical for sustainable development. And we need resourcing in vocation trainings, entrepreneurship opportunities, and environmental education for young people back in Malawi. The other area is on advocacy and policy engagement. While our grassroots initiatives are very, very essential, there is also need to engage with policymakers to create an enabling environment for sustainable development. We need to continue our key role and encourage other agents like Irish Aid to support advocacy efforts aimed at influencing policies on climate change, food security, and education. To sum up, I would like to really express my deepest gratitude to Irish Jesuits International for their continuous support and commitment to making a difference in Malawi and beyond. Your work has not only transformed lives, but also inspired hope and resilience in the face of adversity. So as we celebrate this incredible milestone today, Let us also renew our commitment to working together to create a more just, equitable, and sustainable world. As JCED, we look forward to further collaborations and mission plans that will continue to bring positive change to the lives of many. Thank you so much.